Hello everyone, welcome to today's video on finding percents or percentages. This is our introduction to our percent unit, and we're going to be also setting up the percent proportion. With that in mind, let's get into a definition of a percent. So the definition of a percent is the number of parts per 100, or it's the ratio out of 100. So you actually see that in the word percent. Cent, if you think about that, that means 100. There's 100 cents in a dollar, and yeah, that cent means 100. So per 100, per cent. So you're talking about the number of parts per 100. So we can set that up as a ratio in fraction form, as like a percent symbol, or what's going to be our percent in the numerator, and then the denominator is 100. So that's going to represent the number of parts is my numerator, per 100 in the denominator. Okay, so I'm just going to add that as a note here, that we can think of percent when we're looking at fractions as the numerator when the denominator is 100. Okay? All right, so let's dive into that and see some examples of percents. So for example 1, where you're told there are 100 people in a room, 8 of them have blue hair. What percent of the people have blue hair? All right, so let me reset up this ratio or fraction I just determined. Generally, when I'm thinking about a ratio or a fraction, I'm thinking about parts to whole, right? So in this situation, I have my parts. I have 8 parts, or 8 people with blue hair. And then I'm going to think about the whole as my denominator. So I have 100 people total. So then I would create the fraction 8 over 100, right, is a way of representing the parts to the whole. In this case, 8 out of 100. All right, and now I can compare what I wrote, and I see that I have 100 in the denominator. Awesome. So my percent then is going to be the numerator when that denominator is 100. So my percent is going to be right here, 8%. Okay, so this one is pretty straightforward. There are 100 people, 8 of them have blue hair. So we would say 8% of the room has blue hair. And you see that in our picture as well. We have 100 squares and 8 of them are filled in. So that's going to be 8%. Right? All right, now I want to have you try number 1, which is related. So we have Jordan took an 100-point test and earned 73 points out of the total 100. What percent or grade did Jordan get on the test? Okay, so Jordan got a 73% on this test, which would be a C. And again, I can figure that out. You see my picture that I added. I have 73 points earned out of the 100. So my numerator is 73, so that's going to represent my percent, or the parts per 100, percent. Okay, so we get a 73%. All right, so those ones are pretty simple. In those situations, we are given a whole of 100. So we're already given that per 100. Sometimes, though, the whole isn't 100. And what we have to do is we have to come up with an equivalent ratio to our parts per whole in order to figure out that percent. So we can take a look at that in example 2. So there are now 50 people in a room, and 8 of them have blue hair. So what percent of the people have blue hair? So for this problem, we are again going to try to find that ratio of our part to our whole, because that's what we're doing when we're finding fractions. Percents, these are all related. Okay, so I have my part. I'm going to divide by my whole. Let's see what that means in this situation. So we're going to have my part in blue. Those are the 8 people that have blue hair. And the whole is going to be all the people in the room, 50 people. Okay, so I have 8 divided by 50. Now this is starting to lead up to finding our percent, but the problem is we do not now have a denominator of 100. This is telling me per 50, but we need percent or per 100. So what we're going to do is we're going to use an equivalent ratios to figure out then, if I have this denominator of 100, what's an equivalent ratio or an equivalent fraction to 8/50 that has a denominator of 100? Okay, so to do that, I'm going to ask myself, what factor or what number are we multiplying by to get from 50 to 100? Well, I know 50 times 2, or 50 plus 50, is equal to 100. So to get from 50 to 100, I'm multiplying by 2. Okay, so to come up with an equivalent ratio or fraction, then you also have to multiply the numerator by 2. Okay, because to get an equivalent ratio, if you do the same thing to the numerator and the denominator, it's like you're multiplying by a factor of 1 or form of 1, so it doesn't change. Okay, so then 8 times 2, that is equal to 16. So now that I know that 8/50 is equal to 16 100ths, that's going to tell me, oh, that's in the form already of my percent divided by 100. Okay, so that means since this is the numerator, or the number of parts per 100, the numerator when the denominator is 16, then I'm getting 16% in this situation. 16% of the people in the room have blue hair. And I can also see this in my picture if I double my drawing, right? In my original drawing, I had 50 people in the room and 8 of them had blue hair. So what I can do is just double that situation, or multiply by 2, as I did here in yellow, right? And when I multiplied this, multiplied by 2, now all of a sudden I have 100 total squares, and 16 of them are filled in. So again, I have then the ratio 16 to 100, or 16%. Okay. Awesome. All right, now I'm going to have you try it. So now we have you try number 2. Morgan took a 20-point test and earned 18 points on it. What grade or what percent did they get on the test? Okay, so again now, you can use what's called the percent proportion. Part divided by our whole. And we're going to try to set that equal then to our percent divided by 100. Okay, and yes, this is often called the percent proportion. And it's a proportion because these are two ratios that need to be equivalent to each other. Great job. So you should have gotten 90%, and you can see my work here as well. So we have that our part was 18 points out of our total or whole 20-point test. So now to find the percent, we're going to have that 18/20 equal to the definition of a percent in ratio form, our percent divided by 100, and find that equivalent ratio. So I'm going to say, okay, I have 20 in my denominator for the part to whole, and I need to have 100 as my denominator. So I'm going to do 20 times 5 to get 100. 20 times 5 is 100, so that's the factor that I multiply by. And then thus, if I do that to the denominator, I need to do the same thing to the numerator. So I'm going to take 18 times 5 to figure out my percent, or what goes in the numerator. 18 times 5 is 90. So that means the ratio 18/20 is equal to 90 100ths. There is 90 parts per 100. Thus, it is 90%. Okay, all right, awesome. Now we're going to look at our final example. So our final example is the same type of question that we saw in example 2, but our numbers are slightly less nice. So it's very easy to find the factor to get from 50 to 100. 50 times 2 is 100. Or, 20 times 5 is 100. Same sort of situation. But sometimes you're going to have not a whole number factor, right? So here we're going to have a whole of 18. There is a number, of course. 18 times some number gives you 100, but it's not an integer. It's not a whole number. So then we're going to look at other ways to go about this, particularly with the use of a calculator. It's really important that you understand how to do it in steps 1 and 2, but this does have its uses when you have a calculator and messier numbers. So for this example, we have that 8 out of 18 people interviewed said that they approve of their current House of Representatives representative. And in this case, 8 people out of the 18 approved. And we're trying to figure out what percent then approved. Okay, so we can do this 2 ways. So for method 2, I actually think I'm going to start there because it's a little bit more connected. So for method 2, I have that my part here is 8 and my whole is 18. So again, I can use my percent proportion then to try to solve this. 8 divided by 18 needs to be equal to the percent times 100. So I can try to figure out this factor. 18 times what is going to give me 100. And then once I figure that out, I can again multiply 8 times that number to find my percent. Now that is a method, and this is our second method that you can do and use. What's challenging though is, well, how do you figure that out if it's not a nice easy number? So this means we're taking 18, we're multiplying by some missing number, so I'm going to make that our variable x, and then that is equal to 100. So like 18 times what equals 100? Well, to figure that out, we can solve this one-step equation. Our variable x is currently being multiplied by 18, so we can ask ourselves, how do you undo multiplying by 18? And you undo multiplying by 18 by dividing by 18. Okay, so I'm going to divide both sides by 18. So 100 divided by 18 will give you 5.55555 going off forever, or 5.5 repeating. So that means we can take 18 times 5.5 repeating, and that's going to give you 100. So then we can do 8 times 5.5 repeating, and that will give us our percent. Okay, so 8 times 5.5 repeating is going to give you 44.4 repeating. So that means our percent is approximately 44%, or technically 44.4 repeating percent. Okay, so that's method 2. The reason I called it method 2 is it's more challenging than method 1. So I wouldn't necessarily expect you to always do this, but you can, because it does line up well with what we did in example 2. Okay, but the other way, if we look at example 1, builds on the idea also of solving an equation and messing around with this proportion. So in my first situation here, I see I have percent divided by 100, and I'm trying to solve for the percent. I'm trying to find the percent. So currently my percent is being divided by 100. So if something is being divided by 100, I'm going to ask myself, how do you undo dividing by 100? You multiply by 100. Yep. So then, like, on both sides of this equation, I'm going to multiply by 100 and multiply by 100. And when I do that, on the right-hand side, the 100s cancel away, and I'm just left with my percent. And then on the left, I have my part divided by my whole times 100 is going to equal to the percent. Okay, so that is, again, with a calculator, it's a pretty easy way to do it. So my part in this problem was 8, my whole was 18, and then I'm going to multiply by 100, and that is going to give me the percent. So dividing 8 divided by 18 by hand is decimal long division, possible, but not necessarily what I would do probably here. I would probably just remember that a fraction bar means division. I could do in a calculator 8 divided by 18, and then multiply by 100, and that will give you 44.4 repeating. That's going to be my percent, so we're going to say 44.4 repeating percent of the people approve. Okay, so then this is a version right here of finding the percent. That is really how I was taught a lot growing up, is you just divide numerator by denominator, part divided by whole in fraction form, and then you multiply by 100. which is a great method to use when you have a calculator and after you understand what a percent means. Okay, awesome job, everyone.